My boyfriend and colleague betrayed me after he was seduced by the elegant and beautiful advisor, just for a raise and a better position in the company. He even tried to use me as a stepping stone. Now, he's begging on his knees after realizing that I am the daughter of the CEO. Chapter 1. For years, Ryan and I had been inseparable, partners in both love and work. We met at the company, and from the moment we started collaborating, it felt like fate. We shared dreams of rising through the ranks, making our mark in the business world together. What began as a professional partnership quickly blossomed into a romantic one. I thought we were unstoppable. We spent our evenings discussing business ideas, future goals, and our shared vision for success. At times, it felt like we were the perfect team, one in which I could place my trust completely. But it was all a facade, wasn't it? The trust one thought I had with Ryan, the love I believed was real, was nothing more than a stepping stone for him to climb the corporate ladder. It wasn't just the company that he had set his sights on, it was Carol. Carol was new to the company, a high-ranking executive whose sharp mind and ambition had caught everyone's attention. Initially, I didn't pay her much attention. She was just another person I had to work with, another colleague to collaborate with. But as time passed, I noticed Ryan's behavior starting to change. The way he began seeking Carol's approval for every decision, the late-night meetings he scheduled with her that I was never invited to, it was as though I no longer mattered to him. He and Carol started to work closely, and I could feel the shift in our relationship. He had become distant, his touch more cold than affectionate, his eyes never meeting mine the same way they used to. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, I found myself standing by the coffee machine, overhearing a conversation between Ryan and Carol. I couldn't help but listen. "I think we should pitch the new product to the board tomorrow." "It's the perfect strategy," Ryan said, his voice full of admiration for Carol. "That's a great idea," Carol replied, a subtle but knowing smile on her lips. "You're starting to think like a leader, Ryan." "I like it." I felt a pang of jealousy twist inside me, but I tried to ignore it. It wasn't just about the company, it was about us, the bond we had, the future we were supposed to build together. But deep down, I could sense something was slipping away from me, something I couldn't control. Chapter 2. I began to notice the subtle signs. Ryan no longer called me after work as often, and when he did, his conversations felt distant, almost rehearsed. He spent more time at the office, working with Carol late into the night. I tried to talk to him, but every attempt was met with excuses. "I'm swamped, Sarah," he would say. "I need to focus on this project with Carol. It's important." The more I pushed for clarity, the further he pulled away. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that work had just become overwhelming, but my heart couldn't lie to me. I had lost him, and I didn't even know when it happened. Then came the day that changed everything. Ryan and Carol walked into the office one morning, their smiles too perfect. I had just arrived early for a meeting and caught them in an embrace that didn't seem entirely professional. The way Ryan held Carol, his hands lingering a moment too long, made my blood run cold. It was as if they were a couple, not just colleagues. "Ryan?" I called out, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. Ryan pulled away from Carol quickly, his expression shifting from warmth to discomfort. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone clipped. "I was looking for you," I said, trying to hide the emotions that were bubbling up. "We need to talk." But before he could respond, Carol intervened with a casual smile. "You should go ahead and talk, Sarah. Ryan and I have some important matters to discuss. We'll catch up later." That was the moment I realized Ryan had chosen her. He had chosen his career, his ambition, and Carol over me. And I was nothing more than an afterthought. Chapter 3. Carol and Ryan's alliance didn't just remain professional, it quickly turned personal. I watched helplessly as they grew closer, their subtle exchanges of flirtation slipping past everyone's notice. I was no longer part of their conversations, their decisions, or their plans. But it wasn't just that, Ryan and Carol's treatment of me became more overt. They would laugh behind closed doors, make decisions without consulting me, and purposefully exclude me from meetings. The dynamic had shifted from colleagues to adversaries, and I was the one left on the outside. One day, I overheard a conversation between Ryan and Carol in the hallway. They didn't know I was listening. "You're the future of this company, Ryan," Carol said, her voice silky smooth. "Sarah doesn't belong here. She's just a regular worker. You, on the other hand, have real potential." Ryan's voice was low, almost a whisper. "She's a good at her work, but I've made my decision. I'm moving on, Carol. I'm going to climb higher, and you're the one who's going to help me get there." I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush in and demand an explanation. But instead, I stood frozen, heartbroken and furious at the same time. It had been weeks since the fiasco, the betrayal, and the heartbreaking loss of everything that once seemed so certain. I had tried to go back to normal, tried to bury the ache that lingered every time I thought about Ryan and how much I had loved him. But I couldn't escape the reality that we had both made choices we could never undo. But there was something else now, something that had changed the course of my life. James. It wasn't love. Not yet, at least. But James had always been there, in the background, supporting me without asking for anything in return. When my father had suggested an arranged marriage with him, our preview competitor, I had rejected the idea, thinking that my heart belonged to Ryan. But now, after everything, I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. James was a good man. He was stable, successful, and respected. And he wasn't interested in my wealth, unlike some men, who had wanted nothing more than to climb up the corporate ladder at my expense. I had agreed to the marriage. It wasn't a love match, but it was practical. It was a way to secure my future, to escape the bitterness I had been drowning in since the betrayal. It was a decision I made not out of desperation, but out of a need for stability, for peace. Ryan had crushed my heart, and I needed to move on. But life had a funny way of reminding me of the past. One evening, after work, I met James at a quiet cafe. We had become more than acquaintances, but less than lovers. He respected my space, never pushing for more than I was willing to give. We were both aware of the situation, the upcoming marriage, and the way our lives were intersecting, yet it didn't feel forced. I had been sipping my coffee, distracted by the sound of chatter and the clinking of cups, when James leaned forward across the table, his eyes locked onto mine. "I know this isn't easy for you, Serafina. But I promise, you'll find happiness again. It doesn't have to be with me at first. We'll figure it out, together." I smiled weakly, not ready to dive into the depths of my emotions. "I know, James. It's hard to let go of the past." Just as I was about to speak again, the door to the cafe opened, and I froze. There, standing in the doorway, were Ryan and Carol. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. What were they doing here? Carol's eyes immediately found mine, and a sly grin crossed her face. Ryan, too, glanced in our direction, his expression hardening when he saw me with James. I could tell Carol's mind was working overtime, already spinning stories in her head about what she could do with this new piece of information. Ryan, still looking at me, his eyes full of regret and some jealousy, walked over, but Carol grabbed his arm to stop him. I could see the anger and frustration bubbling just below the surface as they exchanged a few heated words. Carol snapped a photo of James and me, sitting across from each other, looking perfectly innocent. "Don't worry, Ryan," Carol whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "I'm sure this will make an interesting story, don't you think?" Ryan didn't respond right away, but the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable, but he walked away anyway. That was when they started spreading rumors about me. First, it was whispers in the break room. Then, they escalated, claiming I was meeting with a competitor's CEO, trying to steal company secrets. It was all lies, but they didn't care. They wanted me gone. Chapter 4, it all came to a head when they took their game one step too far. One morning, I was summoned to an emergency meeting with the board of directors. When I arrived, I found Ryan and Carol standing at the front, their faces smug with victory. Sarah, Ryan began, his voice calm but dripping with falseness, we have proof that you've been meeting with the CEO of a rival company. You're a traitor, working behind our backs. We have documents to prove it. I froze. What? I whispered. This is insane. I've done nothing wrong. But Ryan and Carol were relentless. They presented forged documents, a fabricated account of a meeting I had attended with James Caldwell, the CEO of a competing firm. See, everyone, Carol said, her voice as smooth as honey. She's been meeting with the competition. She's not loyal to this company. She's been working against us. The room gasped. Whispers filled the air as my colleagues exchanged confused looks. Yep, they had no idea who I really was. But just as I was about to defend myself, the door slammed open, and my father, the CEO of the company, walked in, his expression unreadable. He knew what was happening. He heard this conversation and he had an idea what Ryan and Carol had planned. Ryan smirked. Mr. Westbrook, we have proof, but before he could continue, a figure walked in behind my father, James Caldwell, the man I had met at the cafe. To my shock, my father stepped forward and addressed the room with authority. My father's anger was unmatched. I listened to everything you two say about my little Sarah. Ryan, Carol, you've crossed a line, he said, his voice deadly. Do you know who you're dealing with? James stepped forward next. My name is James Caldwell, he said, and I'm here to tell you that everything they've said is a fabrication. Serafina is my fiancée now, and she's not involved with any rival company. We are not rivals anymore. The room fell silent. Ryan and Carol's faces turned white as they realized the truth. They had no idea who I really was. You think I'm just some regular employee, don't you? I said, my voice shaking with anger. You never knew who I really was, did you? Ryan's eyes widened as realization hit him. But before he could say anything, my father spoke. Ryan, Carol, he said, his tone lethal. I'm the CEO of this company. And this is my daughter. You've been plotting against her, spreading lies, and forging documents. You're both fired. I watched as they tried to recover from their shock, but it was too late. My father turned to them, fury in his eyes. You two thought you could get away with this, he said, his voice ice cold. I'll have both of you fired immediately for defamation and fraud. Get out of my company. You think I'm just some regular employee, don't you? I said, my voice still shaking with anger. You never knew who I really was, did you? Ryan's eyes widened as realization hit him. But before he could say anything, my father spoke. The room fell into stunned silence. Ryan dropped to his knees, his face pale. Sarah, I'm sorry, he pleaded, his voice trembling. I thought, if I stayed with you, I could have everything. I could be the CEO, but you chose her over me, didn't you? I snapped. My voice cutting through the tension. You didn't care about me. You only cared about using me to get ahead. Carol's expression twisted with frustration as she realized the game was over. My father's fury was palpable as he ordered them both out of the company. You're both blacklisted, he said. You'll never work in this industry again. Chapter 5. As Ryan and Carol were escorted out of the building, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The betrayal was painful, but I had stood my ground. And as the dust settled, I realized I was finally free from the lies, free from their manipulation. James Caldwell, the man I had met earlier, stepped forward once again, standing by my side. The truth was out now, he was my fiancé, and together, we would move forward. As he was escorted by bodyguards, Ryan, in his desperation, tried to beg for my forgiveness. Sarah, please. I was wrong. If I had stayed with you, enough, Ryan, I said firmly. You made your choice. Now, you have to live with the consequences. My father turned to me, pride in his eyes. You've done well, my daughter. I'm proud of you. With my head held high, I walked out of that office, leaving the betrayal behind me. And soon, I would marry James, a man who loved me for who I was, not for my family name or wealth. As I left the meeting, I could feel the eyes of the employees on me. They were no longer mocking me or undermining me. Instead, they were looking at me with respect as the daughter of the CEO. Ryan and Carol were blacklisted from the industry, their names forever tarnished. They would never work in this field again, their careers were destroyed, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Meanwhile, I began a new chapter of my life, one filled with love, respect, and the promise of a future built on trust. Chapter 6, Ryan's life was spiraling out of control. The company was gone, and with it, his career. Carol, too, was living in the aftermath of their betrayal. Both of them were jobless, disgraced, and bitter. But what stung the most wasn't losing everything, it was the regret that gnawed at Ryan, especially when he thought about Serafina. How could I have been so blind? He thought over and over again, pacing around his small, empty apartment. Every morning, he tried to remind himself that it was Carol who had pushed him away from Serafina. She had been the one to whisper in his ear, telling him that he could do better, that he deserved more than just a plain and ordinary woman. But in the end, this ordinary woman was the CEO's daughter. He could be the fiancé or the boyfriend of the CEO, but Ryan knew the truth. It wasn't just Carol's influence. He had been the one who had let his ambition cloud his judgment, who had chosen the shiny prospect of climbing the corporate ladder over the woman who had loved him unconditionally. Every day, Ryan would stand outside the gates of Serafina's company, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He couldn't bring himself to go inside, not after everything that had happened. He wasn't sure if she even wanted to see him. But every day, he stood there, waiting, hoping for a chance to apologize. But then there was Carol. And every time Ryan turned his back on her, he could hear her angry voice behind him. "You think you can just walk away from this, Ryan?" Carol snapped one evening as they sat in the shabby apartment that had once seemed like a temporary place to stay. Now, it felt like a prison. She sat on the couch, her eyes cold and accusing. "You're the one who slept with me, the one who let it all happen. You could have stopped it, but you didn't." Ryan shot back, his temper rising. "Me? You think I'm to blame for this mess? You're the one who got me into this. If it weren't for you whispering lies in my ear, I would have never treated Serafina like that. I would have never turned my back on her." Carol laughed bitterly. "Oh, really? You're going to blame me now? What about you? You were the one who couldn't see the bigger picture. You thought you were going to get ahead by using me, but look at where we are now. Both of us jobless, with no future." Ryan slammed his fist on the table, his frustration boiling over. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt Serafina." His voice cracked as he remembered how it felt to watch her walk away from him. "But you," he pointed at her accusingly, "you pushed me to do it. You convinced me that she wasn't enough for me, that I could have more, that I could be someone important. And now look at us. We've lost everything." Carol's face twisted with anger. "I didn't force you to do anything, Ryan. You made the choice. You chose to believe the lies I fed you. You chose to betray her." Ryan felt his chest tighten as he thought about Serafina. "I never meant to hurt you. I should have trusted you. But I was so focused on winning, on climbing higher." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Carol crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can just waltz back into Serafina's life and ask for forgiveness? You think she'll take you back after what you've done? You're delusional." Ryan's voice softened, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I've got to try. I have to try, or I'll never forgive myself." Carol snorted, standing up and walking to the window. "Try all you want, but you and I both know the truth. You lost her the moment you decided to betray her. And now we have nothing. No job, no reputation, nothing." Ryan clenched his fists, fighting back the rising tide of anger and regret. We didn't have to lose everything. This was your doing, too, Carol. You could have told me to stop. You could have said no when I got too close to you. But instead, you fed into my ambition. You made me believe I could have it all. And now we have nothing. Carol turned back to face him, her eyes wild. You think I'm the only one to blame? You're the one who was too weak to see through my lies. You chose me over her, remember? You wanted this. You wanted to be with me, to be a part of my world. Ryan shook his head, his voice cracking with emotion. I didn't want this. I wanted her. I wanted Serafina. But you, his voice trailed off as the weight of the truth settled in. He'd made the wrong choice, and now he had to live with it. The silence between them was thick with tension. Each of them was waiting for the other to break, to say something that would change everything. But no words came. They both knew the truth, they were both to blame, and neither of them could undo the damage they'd caused. Ryan turned away from Carol, his heart heavy. I can't stay here. I can't do this anymore. His voice was steady, though his mind was clouded with the regrets he could never escape. I'm going to try and make things right. I owe her that much. Carol's eyes burned with anger. Go ahead. Try. But don't come crawling back to me when it's too late. Ryan didn't respond. He couldn't. There was nothing left to say. He left the apartment, the door slamming behind him as he stepped out into the night. Each step he took felt like a step away from the life he had once known. And every moment was filled with the bitter taste of regret, the realization that he had lost the love of his life, the one person who had always been there for him. He thought about Serafina every moment, the pain of losing her a constant ache in his chest. But Ryan was determined. He had made a terrible mistake, and now it was time to face the consequences. He only hoped it wasn't too late. Ryan couldn't stop replaying the last few days, the betrayal he had inflicted on Serafina. The lies. The deceit. It was as if everything he had worked for had turned to dust, and it was all because of one foolish mistake, choosing Carol over her. But now, the harsh reality was inescapable. Every day, Ryan would stand outside the gates of the company, hoping to catch a glimpse of Serafina, hoping that somehow, she would look at him again, not with disdain or anger, but with forgiveness. But every time he saw her walking past, arm in arm with James Caldwell, a reminder of everything he had lost, the weight of his regret grew heavier. The ache in his chest was unbearable. He had no idea how he could fix this, how he could ever make up for what he had done. But each day, he tried. He tried to apologize. Tried to make her see that he was sorry. But Serafina never stopped. She never once looked back. She just kept walking past him, her face set in stone, her eyes never meeting his. Carol, on the other hand, was no better. After the scandal, after being fired, Carol was a shadow of the confident, powerful woman she had once been. She had been a catalyst in Ryan's downfall, encouraging him to choose ambition over love. But now, she found herself lost, desperate, and bitter. Ryan and Carol's relationship, once filled with promises of success, quickly began to deteriorate. Both were jobless, with their careers destroyed. They spent their days blaming each other for everything that went wrong. The blame game was endless. Neither of them was willing to take responsibility for their own actions. Ryan's pride wouldn't allow him to admit that he had played a part in his own destruction. Carol's arrogance blinded her to the fact that she had played him just as much as he had played Serafina. Days turned into weeks, and their bickering only escalated. They both watched as their lives crumbled further. The money that once flowed freely was now a distant memory. Ryan's savings had evaporated, and Carol's connections in the industry were now useless. Every job opportunity they tried to secure fell through. No one wanted to take on a disgraced ex-executive who had been publicly fired for dishonesty. Their calls went unanswered. Their emails ignored. Carol began to grow angry, blaming Ryan for dragging her down with him. If you hadn't been so blind, so stupid, we could have had everything. You ruined us both, she screamed one night, throwing a glass against the wall. Ryan stared at her, his face hardening. And you think I don't know that? You think I don't regret it every damn day? He slumped onto the couch, head in his hands. I don't even know where to go from here, Carol. I've lost everything. She's gone. My career's gone. And it's all because I didn't see who she really was. Carol's anger simmered down, but only slightly. She was never going to forgive you. You don't understand. She's the CEO's daughter. And she's married to James now. You had no chance from the start. And now you're just like me, nothing. They both sat in the silence that followed, knowing there was no way out, no way to undo what had been done. Their futures were bleak. The world they had once known, full of promises of power, money, and success, was gone. And it was their own fault. The days dragged on. Every morning, Ryan woke up with the same regret gnawing at him. He could still see Serafina's face, her eyes full of pain and disappointment, as he had betrayed her. She had trusted him. She had loved him. And he had thrown it all away for a fleeting chance at power, for Carol's empty promises. One morning, Ryan stood once again at the gates of the company, waiting, hoping. He hadn't seen Serafina in days. But today, something was different. Today, he saw her, walking briskly, her expression unreadable as she neared the gates. And beside her, as always, was James, a man who had not only won her heart but had also stepped in where Ryan had failed. Serafina! Ryan called out, his voice desperate, broken. Serafina didn't stop. She didn't even acknowledge him, as if he was invisible. She walked right past him, her heels clicking on the pavement, her face set forward. James, however, paused, his eyes meeting Ryan's with a look of disdain. I warned you, Ryan, James said coldly. You should have known who she was. You should have known who she was. Ryan felt the sting of those words, but he didn't have the strength to argue. His throat closed up. All he could do was watch as Serafina and James walked into the building, leaving him standing alone in the cold, with nothing but the crushing weight of his regret. That day, for the first time, Ryan fully understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had thrown away his future for nothing. And now, he would spend the rest of his life regretting it.